He left her because she was poor. Years later, she returned as a billionaire heiress. Don't ever come back, Daniel said coldly, pushing the old photograph back into her hands. I'm marrying someone who can actually give me the life I deserve. Emily stood there in her faded dress, fighting back tears. He thought she had nothing. He was wrong. 7 years later, the doors of the city's most expensive hotel opened, and Emily walked in wearing a diamond necklace worth millions. Daniel froze. Because the woman he had abandoned was no longer poor. She was the billionaire heiress everyone had been searching for. The rain had been falling for nearly an hour when Emily Carter stood outside Daniel Hayes's apartment, holding a small paper bag in both hands. Inside it was a simple birthday cake. It wasn't expensive. She had baked it herself in the tiny kitchen of the apartment she shared with her mother. The icing wasn't perfect, and one side of the cake had collapsed slightly, but Emily had spent 3 hours making it. Tonight was supposed to be special. Daniel had promised her they would celebrate his birthday together. Emily smiled nervously as she pressed the doorbell. No answer. She checked her phone. 9:47 p.m. Daniel had seen her messages but hadn't replied. She knocked. A few seconds later, the door opened. Daniel stood there wearing an expensive black shirt Emily had never seen before. Behind him, the apartment was filled with music. And people. Emily's smile disappeared. Daniel? He stared at her without saying anything. Then his eyes moved to the paper bag in her hands. You came. Emily nodded. You said we'd celebrate your birthday together. Daniel sighed. Emily, I forgot to tell you something. Her heart tightened. What? Before Daniel could answer, a beautiful young woman appeared behind him. She wore a designer dress and carried a champagne glass. Daniel, who's she? Emily looked at the woman. Then at Daniel. He didn't introduce her. The woman smiled awkwardly. Daniel finally said, She's Emily. The woman raised an eyebrow. Oh. That single word somehow hurt more than an insult. Emily looked around the apartment. Everyone was dressed beautifully. She suddenly became aware of her simple dress, inexpensive shoes, and damp hair from the rain. Daniel stepped outside and quietly closed the door behind him. Why did you bring this? He pointed at the cake. Emily looked down. It's your birthday. I know. I thought you might like it. Daniel rubbed his forehead. Emily, this is exactly what I'm talking about. What do you mean? He looked uncomfortable. You don't understand the kind of life I want. Emily stared at him. We've been together for 3 years. I know. I was with you when you lost your job. I know. I worked 2 shifts at the cafe when you needed money. Emily, I never asked you for anything. That isn't the point. Then what is? Daniel became silent. Finally, he said something Emily would remember for the rest of her life. The point is that I'm tired of living like I'm poor. Emily's eyes filled with tears. You think I'm the reason you're poor? No. Then what are you saying? Daniel looked toward the apartment. I met someone. Emily's breath stopped. The woman inside? He nodded. Her name is Victoria. And? She comes from a wealthy family. Emily stared at him in disbelief. So you're leaving me because she's rich? Daniel didn't answer. That silence was enough. Emily slowly held out the cake. Happy birthday. Daniel didn't take it. She lowered her hand. Do you still love me? Daniel looked away. I don't know. Emily swallowed the lump in her throat. After 3 years, that's all you can say? I've changed. No, Emily whispered. You've just found someone richer. Daniel's face hardened. You always make everything emotional. Emily laughed bitterly. Because it is emotional for me. You were my future. Well, you're not mine anymore. The words crushed her. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Then Daniel said, Please don't make a scene. Emily looked at him. I haven't made a scene. She turned around. Emily. She stopped. Daniel finally took something from his pocket. It was a small silver necklace. The one he had given her on their first anniversary. Leave it. Emily looked at the necklace. Then at him. You don't want it anymore? No. She removed it slowly and placed it in his hand. Then keep it. She walked down the stairs. Behind her, she could hear the party continuing. Music. Laughter. Champagne glasses. Nobody knew that the woman walking away had just lost the man she thought she would marry. Emily stepped outside. The rain had become heavier. She didn't have an umbrella. She didn't care. She walked several blocks before finally stopping beneath an old streetlight. Then she cried. Not because Daniel had chosen another woman, but because she had spent 3 years believing that love was enough. That night, Emily returned home after midnight. Her mother, Margaret, was sitting awake in the living room. The moment she saw Emily's face, she knew something was wrong. Emily? Emily tried to smile. I'm fine. Margaret stood. Where's Daniel? Emily couldn't answer. Her mother walked toward her. He left me, Emily finally whispered. Margaret hugged her. Emily broke down. He left because I'm poor. Margaret closed her eyes. She had always feared this day. But there was something Emily didn't know. Something Margaret had kept hidden for 24 years. She looked toward an old wooden cabinet in the corner of the room. Inside that cabinet was a locked metal box. And inside that box was a secret that could change Emily's entire life. Margaret had promised herself she would never reveal it. But now Daniel had walked away. And perhaps the time had finally come. The next morning, Margaret placed the metal box on the kitchen table. Emily stared at it. What is that? Margaret sat across from her. Something that belongs to you. Emily frowned. My father? Margaret's hands trembled. No. She slowly unlocked the box. Inside was an old photograph. A man in a black suit stood beside a woman holding a newborn baby. Emily picked it up. She looked at the man. Something about his face seemed strangely familiar. Mom, who is this? Margaret took a deep breath. Your father. Emily's eyes widened. You told me my father died before I was born. I lied. Silence filled the room. Why? Margaret looked directly into her daughter's eyes. Because your father wasn't an ordinary man. She pushed another document across the table. Emily opened it. At the top was a name she had never heard before. Richard Carter. Underneath it was the name of a company Emily recognized instantly. One of the largest private investment empires in the country. Emily looked at her mother in disbelief. Mom, what does this mean? Margaret's voice shook. It means, Emily, that the life you thought you were born into, she paused, was never your real life. And for the first time, Emily realized that Daniel hadn't abandoned a poor girl. He had walked away from a woman whose true identity was about to be revealed. Emily stared at the document for several seconds, unable to understand what she was seeing. Mom, this company belongs to Richard Carter? Margaret nodded. Emily knew the name. Everyone did. Carter Global Holdings was one of the most powerful private investment companies in the country. Its founder, Richard Carter, had built an enormous business empire before disappearing from public life more than 2 decades ago. Emily slowly looked at the photograph again. The man holding the baby was smiling. She looked at his eyes. Then at her mother. Why did you never tell me? Margaret's eyes filled with tears. Because your father made enemies. What kind of enemies? The kind that don't forgive. Margaret explained that she had met Richard when she was young. They had fallen deeply in love, but Richard's family never accepted her. Richard was expected to marry another woman from a powerful family. Instead, he chose Margaret. When she became pregnant, everything changed. Richard's father threatened to destroy him financially if he refused to leave Margaret. Richard refused. Then, one night, Richard disappeared. Margaret was told that he had died. She never believed it. But she had no money, no connections, and a newborn daughter to protect. So she left the city and raised Emily quietly. What happened to him? Emily asked. Margaret looked down. I don't know. Emily's fingers tightened around the document. Then how do you know I'm his daughter? Margaret reached into the metal box again. She pulled out a small envelope. Inside was a DNA report. Emily read the first few lines. Her hands began to shake. The report confirmed that Richard Carter was her biological father. But that wasn't the only surprise. Another document showed that Richard had established a private trust for his child. The amount was enormous. Emily could barely breathe. Mom, Margaret nodded. He left something for you. How much? Margaret hesitated. Enough to change your life. Emily shook her head. I don't want his money. This isn't about money. Then what is it about? Your father wanted you to know who you were. Emily looked away. Only hours earlier, she had been crying because Daniel had left her for a wealthy woman. Now she was sitting in front of documents suggesting that she belonged to one of the wealthiest families in the country. It felt impossible. Before Emily could say anything else, Margaret's phone rang. She looked at the screen and froze. Who is it? Emily asked. Margaret didn't answer. The number was unfamiliar. She finally picked up. Hello? A man's voice came through. Is this Margaret Carter? Margaret stood immediately. Who is this? My name is Thomas Reed. I was your husband's attorney. Margaret's face went pale. Emily watched her mother carefully. Thomas continued. I've been searching for you for years. Why? Because Richard left instructions before he disappeared. Margaret's hand trembled. What instructions? He told me that if anything happened to him, I was to locate his daughter. Emily's heart began racing. Thomas said, I believe I've finally found her. Margaret looked at Emily. Thomas continued. Miss Carter has inherited a substantial trust. Emily whispered, how much? Margaret didn't answer. Thomas said the amount. Emily almost dropped the phone. It was far more than she could have imagined. But Thomas wasn't finished. There is one condition. What condition? Emily asked. Thomas paused. The trust can only be transferred after your identity is formally verified. Emily agreed to meet him. The following afternoon, she and Margaret arrived at a quiet office downtown. Thomas Reed was waiting. He was an older man with silver hair and a serious expression. The moment he saw Emily, his eyes widened. You look exactly like him. Emily sat down. I need answers. You deserve them. Thomas opened a leather folder. Your father didn't abandon you. Emily looked at him. He tried to protect you. Thomas explained that Richard had discovered someone inside his company was secretly stealing millions of dollars. Before he could expose the person responsible, Richard disappeared. He feared they would come after you, Thomas said. So he left everything behind? He hid it. Thomas placed several documents on the table. Richard had transferred ownership of several assets into a private trust. The trust was designed to remain untouched until Emily turned 25. Emily had turned 25 3 months earlier. That means, you are now legally entitled to the inheritance. Emily stared at the papers. For years, she had worked double shifts just to pay rent. She had worn the same shoes until the soles nearly came apart. She had been called poor by the man she loved. And all this time, she had been the hidden heir to a fortune. But Emily wasn't thinking about money. She was thinking about Daniel. Then she stopped herself. No, she whispered. Thomas looked at her. No? Emily shook her head. I'm not going back to him. Margaret smiled faintly. That is the first thing you've said today that sounds completely certain. Meanwhile, across town, Daniel was celebrating his engagement to Victoria. He had already convinced himself that leaving Emily had been the best decision of his life. Victoria's family had connections. Money. Power. A future. Everything he wanted. Then his phone rang. It was his father. Daniel, have you seen the news? What news? Carter Global Holdings. Daniel frowned. What about it? The missing heir has reportedly been located. Daniel laughed. What does that have to do with me? His father's voice became serious. They're saying her name is Emily Carter. Daniel stopped breathing. What? Emily Carter. 25 years old. Raised by a woman named Margaret. The glass in Daniel's hand slipped. It shattered across the floor. Victoria looked at him. Daniel? What's wrong? He couldn't answer. He remembered the rainy night. The cheap cake. Emily standing outside his door. The words he had spoken. You're not my future anymore. Daniel's face turned pale. He had believed he was leaving a poor girl behind. But now he was hearing something impossible. The woman he had abandoned? Might be a billionaire heiress. And suddenly, the decision he had celebrated the night before became the biggest mistake of his life. Daniel couldn't sleep that night. He sat alone in his apartment, staring at the old silver necklace Emily had returned to him. For 3 years, he had believed Emily was holding him back. Now he couldn't stop thinking about one question. What if he had made the biggest mistake of his life? His phone buzzed. It was Victoria. Are you coming to dinner? Daniel looked at the message but didn't respond. A few minutes later, another message arrived. Daniel? He finally called her. Victoria, I need to ask you something. What? Did you know about Emily Carter? There was silence. Then Victoria asked, why are you asking? Daniel's stomach tightened. You knew? Victoria sighed. I heard the rumors this afternoon. Rumors? People are saying she's Richard Carter's daughter. Daniel stood. Why didn't you tell me? Because I didn't know if it was true. Daniel ran a hand through his hair. I'm going to find her. Victoria's voice immediately changed. Why? I need to talk to her. No. Daniel froze. What? You're not going anywhere. Victoria, this is my decision. No, Daniel. You're only interested because she might be rich. Her words hit him because he knew they were true. But instead of admitting it, he became angry. You don't understand. I understand perfectly. Victoria ended the call. The next morning, Daniel drove to the address he had found through an old mutual friend. It was the small house where Emily had lived with her mother. He expected to find her there. Instead, an unfamiliar black car was parked outside. Daniel knocked. Margaret opened the door. The moment she saw him, her expression hardened. What do you want? I need to see Emily. She doesn't want to see you. Please. Margaret stepped outside and closed the door behind her. You left my daughter because you thought she was poor. Daniel lowered his eyes. I made a mistake. No. You made a choice. I know. You told her she wasn't your future. Daniel swallowed. I was wrong. Margaret looked at him coldly. You weren't wrong. You simply showed her who you really are. Daniel had no answer. Then a black luxury sedan stopped at the end of the street. The rear door opened. Emily stepped out. Daniel froze. She wasn't wearing expensive jewelry. She wasn't dressed like someone trying to prove anything. She wore a simple cream-colored suit and carried a folder. But something about her had changed. Her posture. Her confidence. Her eyes. Emily saw Daniel. For a moment, neither spoke. Daniel walked toward her. Emily. She stopped him with a look. Why are you here? I heard about your father. Emily's expression remained calm. And? I wanted to make sure you're okay. She almost laughed. You never asked if I was okay when you left me in the rain. Daniel looked down. I regret it. You should. I know I hurt you. You did. I was stupid. Emily nodded. Yes, you were. Daniel looked at her. Can we talk? Emily glanced at her mother. Then back at him. You have 5 minutes. They walked to the sidewalk. Daniel struggled to find the right words. I didn't know. Emily raised an eyebrow. Didn't know what? That you were? He stopped. Rich. Daniel nodded. Emily smiled sadly. So that's what changed? No. Then what did? Daniel had no answer. Emily folded her arms. When I had nothing, you didn't want me. That's not true. You said you were tired of living like you were poor. I was angry. You said Victoria could give you the life you deserved. Daniel looked ashamed. I made a terrible decision. You did. I want another chance. Emily stared at him. No. Daniel's face fell. Please. You had your chance. I still love you. Emily shook her head. You don't love me. I do. You love what you think I can give you now. Daniel became silent. Emily's voice softened. That's the difference. She turned to leave. Daniel suddenly grabbed her wrist. Emily pulled away immediately. Don't touch me. He stepped back. I'm sorry. Emily looked at him for several seconds. Then she said, Goodbye, Daniel. She walked away. Daniel watched her disappear into the car. But Emily wasn't finished with the past. That afternoon, she met Thomas Reed at Carter Global Holdings. The headquarters was enormous. Employees stood as she entered. Some recognized her from the news. Others whispered, That's Richard Carter's daughter. The missing heir. Emily ignored them. Thomas led her to the top floor. There, he showed her a private office that had remained locked for 24 years. This belonged to your father. Emily slowly entered. Dust covered the desk. A large photograph of Richard stood beside the window. Emily touched the frame. I wish I could have met him. Thomas looked away. There is something else. He opened a hidden compartment beneath the desk. Inside was a sealed envelope. Emily's name was written across it. Her hands trembled as she opened it. The letter was from Richard. He explained that he had discovered a conspiracy inside the company. Someone close to him had stolen millions. He had planned to expose them. But before he could, he received a warning. If he went to the authorities, Emily would be harmed. Richard disappeared to protect his daughter. At the bottom of the letter was one final sentence. Emily, if you're reading this, it means the danger has finally returned. Emily looked up. What danger? Thomas's expression changed. Before he could answer, the office lights suddenly went out. The entire floor went dark. A second later, Emily's phone received an anonymous message. You should have left the past buried. Emily stared at the screen, then another message appeared. Your father didn't disappear. He was betrayed. Thomas rushed toward the door. But it was already locked. Emily heard a faint sound from the hallway. Footsteps. Someone was coming. And whoever it was had been waiting 24 years for Richard Carter's daughter to return. The footsteps outside the office became louder. Emily stood beside Thomas, staring at the locked door. Who is that? She whispered. Thomas shook his head. I don't know. The handle suddenly moved. Once. Twice. Then the lights came back on. The hallway was empty. Emily's phone buzzed again. This time, there was only one sentence. Check your father's safe. Thomas immediately walked toward the old wall behind the desk. Your father had a private safe here. He removed a framed photograph and revealed a small keypad. Emily entered the only number she could think of. Her birthday. The safe opened. Inside were financial records, photographs, an old USB drive, and a handwritten notebook. Thomas picked up the notebook. His face changed. This is Richard's handwriting. Emily opened it. The pages revealed everything. 24 years earlier, Richard had discovered that his chief financial officer, Victor Grant, had been secretly moving company money into hidden accounts. But Victor wasn't working alone. He had an inside partner. Someone Richard trusted completely. Thomas turned pale as he read the final pages. "Who was it?" Emily asked. Thomas looked at her. "Your grandfather's personal advisor." Emily's eyes widened. How could he be involved? Because he controlled access to the family's accounts. Richard had planned to expose both men. But before he could, someone leaked his plans. Richard realized Emily was in danger. He disappeared voluntarily and left instructions with Thomas to protect his daughter until she was old enough to inherit the trust. Then Emily noticed something strange. One photograph showed Richard standing beside a young Thomas. Behind them was another man. Emily pointed at him. "Who is that?" Thomas stared at the photograph. His face went white. "That can't be." "Who?" "Victor Grant." Emily looked at him. "But he's dead, isn't he?" Thomas slowly shook his head. "We were told he died 20 years ago." Suddenly, the office door opened. A man in his 60s walked in. Emily stepped backward. The man smiled. "Hello, Emily." Thomas whispered, "Victor." Victor closed the door behind him. "You've become exactly like your father." Emily stood her ground. "You threatened me. I wanted you to stop searching. Where is my father?" Victor's smile disappeared. "Your father is alive." Emily's heart stopped. "Where?" Victor hesitated. "Somewhere far away." "Why did you make everyone believe he was dead?" "Because it was the only way to keep him alive." Thomas stepped forward. "You destroyed his life." Victor looked at him. "And you helped him hide." Emily's voice trembled. "Why did you betray him?" Victor looked toward the window. "Money." He admitted everything. He had stolen millions from the company with the help of Richard's advisor. When Richard discovered the truth, they planned to silence him. But Richard escaped. Instead of running to the authorities, Richard disappeared because he feared Emily would become a target. Victor eventually fled the country. Now that Emily had inherited the company, he had returned to take control of the remaining assets. But Emily had already recorded his confession on her phone. Thomas immediately contacted the authorities. Victor's expression changed. "You recorded me?" Emily nodded. "You made one mistake." "What?" "You underestimated the poor girl." Within weeks, the investigation exposed the entire conspiracy. The stolen money was recovered. Victor and his accomplices were arrested. And Emily finally learned the truth about her father. Richard Carter was living quietly in another country under a different identity. Emily traveled to meet him. When she entered the small house, she saw an older man standing near the window. He turned. Their eyes met. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Richard whispered, "Emily?" She nodded. "Dad." He covered his face with his hands. 25 years of regret came pouring out. Emily walked toward him. "You should have come back." "I wanted to." "Why didn't you?" "I was afraid." Emily hugged him. For the first time in her life, she felt like a missing piece of her story had finally returned. Months later, Emily officially took control of Carter Global Holdings. But she didn't become the arrogant billionaire everyone expected. She remembered what it felt like to have nothing. So she created scholarships, opened community programs, and funded shelters for struggling families. Her story eventually became national news. And Daniel saw every headline. Emily Carter, the hidden billionaire heiress who rebuilt her family empire. Daniel's life had changed too. Victoria had ended their engagement after discovering that Daniel had tried to reconnect with Emily because of her inheritance. His business plans collapsed. His friends disappeared. And the luxurious future he had imagined never happened. One evening, Daniel received an invitation. It was for a charity gala hosted by Emily. He almost threw it away. Instead, he went. Inside the ballroom, Emily stood surrounded by influential people. She looked confident, elegant, and completely at peace. Daniel approached her. "Emily." She turned. "Daniel. I wanted to apologize." "You already did." "I know. But I never really said what I should have." Emily waited. "I treated you badly because I thought money made someone valuable." Emily looked at him quietly. "You weren't the only one who made that mistake." Daniel nodded. "I lost the best person I ever had." Emily smiled faintly. "No, Daniel." He looked at her. "You lost the woman who loved you when you had nothing." She paused. "I became a billionaire afterward, but that's not what made me valuable." Daniel lowered his head. "I know." Emily walked away. She didn't feel angry anymore. She didn't need revenge. Her success was already the answer. Years earlier, Daniel had looked at her faded dress and decided she wasn't good enough for his future. Now Emily stood in a room filled with millions of dollars, powerful people, and opportunities. But the greatest thing she had gained wasn't wealth. It was freedom. Freedom from the man who couldn't see her worth. Freedom from the secrets that had haunted her family. And freedom to choose her own future. That night, Emily stepped onto the balcony and looked over the city. She remembered the girl standing in the rain with a cheap birthday cake. That girl had thought her life was over. Emily smiled. It wasn't over. It had only been beginning. And somewhere deep inside, she finally understood the truth. Sometimes, losing the person who doesn't value you is the first step toward discovering your own worth. Emily turned toward the lights of the city. The billionaire heiress had finally come home. And this time, she didn't need anyone's approval to know exactly who she was. If you enjoyed this story, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the bell icon so you never miss our next emotional story. And don't forget to tell us in the comments, ***, where are you watching from, ***.